Talks radio platform. My name is The Fish, if you will. Call me Seabass if you'd like, but you can call me The Fish. Got Marco Squitieri, a sports journalism major from the University of Wisconsin. Man, what's happening in the Dairy State, big guy?
Hey, great to be on. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, just ready to get at it. A lot of interesting sports to talk about, so I'm excited to
Yeah.
be here.
The order of the day is going to be Major League Baseball, as we are just about 3 or 4 games. I think right around the end of this weekend is going to mark right around the halfway point of the Major League Baseball season. And it has been quite an interesting season, to say the least, so far to this point. There's been some major disappointments. There's been some unbelievable surprises. And Marco, some teams that we're not really used or expecting to see play the kind of baseball that they're playing right now, has kept some things interesting. But, it's interesting. Last week, Marco, going into, I want to say, Monday's action, earlier in this week, going into Monday's action, there were 11 teams of the 30 in Major League Baseball that at that point were playing winning baseball. The rest, you had this big glob of so-so baseball to extremely poor. I think the difference this time, Marco, between this year and maybe let's just say go back a year or so ago, is the fact that we've got about 3 or 4 teams who aren't just playing good baseball. They're destroying everything in their way. And it's been fun to watch. But the problem is for me, and I want to see what you think about this, is it's led to, if you look at these divisional races, most of these races, now look, no, a divisional race is not ended in June. That's obviously the case. But there's only 1 or 2 divisions here of all of the 6 that are even remotely close right now. What do you think's going on with that, Marco?
Yeah, Fish, I think you nailed it on the head right there. I can't remember a season in recent memory where we've had this glob of teams. I think only 3 or 4 teams are above 500, coming into this week. I mean, that's the type of mediocrity that I don't think we've seen on such a large scale in a very long time. And like you said with the division races, I mean, you have the NL East still, I think, in a little bit of contention. I think the Braves is definitely a team where they have that quality. We've seen it from them before. I wouldn't be surprised to see them potentially give the Phillies a little bit of trouble. The NL Central, I think the Brewers have definitely shown that they are a peg above the rest for sure. But when you're looking around, I mean, you've got the AL East too, with kind of a 2-horse race there with the Orioles and the Yankees, both just elite World Series contending teams. But a lot of disappointments. I mean, you look at like the AL West, for example. You look at the Astros. I mean, when have we seen the Astros be as bad as they have been in the past 10 years? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, divisional breakdown, kind of a report card, if you will, Marco. Let's start with the American League. We'll start where you were just referencing the AL West, a division that has been completely dominated by the Houston Astros for the last several years. And as you mentioned, now they're a disappointment. Now, the one thing I would say is they are in second place, but that is very deceiving. They're 5 games under 500 going into today's action. Especially the beginning of the season, they couldn't win games at home. The pitching wasn't helping out. And even though they climbed up to second, they're still 8 games behind. And I won't say upstart Seattle. We expected Seattle to be probably a wild card team, but they have one of the biggest divisional leads in all of baseball right now. But you're right, because not only does this group include the Astros, but it also includes the defending world champion Texas Rangers. That same Ranger team who in playoffs last year went, and I still can't believe this, Marco, 11-0 on the road in the playoffs. You go 11-0 on the playoffs on the road in Major League Baseball, and we all know what atmospheres are like in Major League Baseball with those people going crazy, the towels waving. That's hard to do. They went undefeated in it. Nobody expected that. So for me, I would have to categorize the Rangers, even though nobody really expected them to win it all last year, to be one of, along with the Astros, one of the biggest disappointments in all of baseball so far.
I'd have to agree with you for sure. I mean, the Rangers, it is difficult with their injury issues. You're missing Jacob deGrom and Max Scherzer. Those are 2 Hall of Fame level pitchers. So you do, I think, have to take that into a little bit of account. But absolutely, I mean, the defending champions and what they were able to put together, not just in October, but leading up to that run, all of really the second half of last season, a team that really showed something special and showed that they had this sort of like tenacity, that's required to win in October. Because I think Major League Baseball, it's very different than other sports where you do have to kind of have that like, your team has to be stuck together. You have to have that chemistry. You have to have that grit.
Right.
And that's something I really saw from them last year. And so I'd have to agree with you. Just utterly disappointing the lack of fight they've put up. And you have a guy like Wyatt Langford, who comes up and hasn't even knocked one out of the park yet. So it's like so many disappointments, and there's so much potential there too. That's what makes it frustrating.
You about the AL West right now. Seattle is enjoying an 8-game lead as we speak, despite the fact their run differential for the season is plus 11. Plus 11 is in most divisions going to get you third or fourth, somewhere around there. And it's given them an 8-game cushion as we go into today's action over Houston. And they're only plus 11 for the entire season. That doesn't speak to Seattle as it does the rest of the West.
Yeah, and I think also when you're looking at Seattle too, you have to look at Julio Rodriguez. I mean, that guy hasn't been putting it together all year. So when you have a guy who's supposed to be their stud, he's supposed to be their horse, and he's not even the one carrying the load. For me, that almost gives me more optimism for the future because you can see the room where they're going to improve. I don't expect him to be a below league average hitter the entire season. That's just not the type of guy that I see him as being. So if you see, even though, like you said, they haven't maybe had that dominance that you would expect from a division leader, especially a division that's been strong in previous years. But I still think they're a team that really excites me, to be honest with you. I think their pitching. I mean, they have the type of pitching where in October, if you have to go up against like stud after stud after stud, that's the type of team that I can see really like if they're clicking at the right time, they're going to be hard to stop.
To the AL Central, I'll ask you this because I expect. Look, it's halfway point. I don't expect Seattle to lose this divisional lead. They're the best team in it, and we'll see. But look, the Angels are what they are. They're the underachieving nexus of the universe, have been forever. Injuries and some of these cats that have moved on have really killed them. And Oakland, to be honest with you, has actually outperformed what
I was going to say. Yeah, I mean, well, everyone thought Oakland was going to be, which was like maybe a AAA team. They're not good, obviously, but I can't say they're the worst team in the MLB. And for them, I mean, that's not exactly a fun standard to have, but they are overperforming in a way,
On Oakland for just a second. Do you think, because I had an interesting conversation on my show the other day, and the caller said they felt that Oakland would hold on to Mason Miller. But my question is, why? You're 20 games, right around 20 games under 500. You're not going to the playoffs. You're going to get a ransom for Mason Miller. And you're so far away from playing meaningful baseball. He's a great closer. There's no doubt. What's he hit? 103 this year, I think, and pretty consistently. Can you give me a reason why Oakland would hold on to Mason Miller, the premier closer in the game in my mind right now?
I mean, the only reason I could give you is they're a franchise that consistently makes bad decisions. I mean, it would be the wrong decision. A closer is a piece that you're not going to build your franchise around a closer, right? A closer is kind of a last piece, kind of, we're one step away. And they are about as many steps away as I can imagine. And it's also a team, you got to think about it too, from a top-down perspective, they're not trying to win, right? They're focused on winning in 3-4 years down the road. They don't want to put out a winning product right now. So, I mean, the only reason I could give you for holding on to him would be just outright incompetence because, like you said, to your point,
totally agree.
An outstanding guy, a stud, a dude who is really one of the only exciting things that they have going for them. But I mean, what purpose is he serving on your team? A closer for a team that's going to win like 60 games. I mean, like, what are we talking about
here? And that's about exactly. He'd be the best of the biz if he stays right there. Let's move on to the AL Central. And I got to tell you, the AL Central to me, Marco, has been the most pleasant surprise from a divisional aspect all year. And I think a couple of reasons for that. One, first of all, I knew the Guardians would be solid. I didn't know that when we decided to do this podcast tonight, they'd be coming in 20 games over 500 and have a player hitting almost 400. Right now, this team has really put it together. But the surprise for me, and it probably shouldn't be because I think a lot of people said, and everybody knows about Bobby Witt Jr., but a lot of people said this is a good young team that's not quite there yet. And I think that that's still the case. Now, they can definitely contribute compete for a wild card. They're not catching Cleveland. Cleveland's going to run away with that Central. But I look at this division, and for me, it was kind of, well, the next logical team is Minnesota, and they're doing all right. They're above 500. They're 7 games over 500. But I don't think many people saw Kansas City doing this well this soon.
No, absolutely. I mean, Kansas City, I think, has been the most pleasant surprises, like you mentioned. I mean, Bobby Witt playing an MVP level, really carrying the load for them. But you also have guys like Seth Lugo. I mean, Seth Lugo has a 2.3 ERA. I mean, I don't think anybody expected that coming into the year. You have a guy like Salvador Perez, still doing it for them, still carrying the load. I think that's a really interesting division for sure. I think Minnesota is a team that I could really see starting to put it a little bit more together. You still have Carlos Correa, who seems to really have figured it out this year. Pitching is a spot where they've struggled, obviously. But I was looking at Fangraphs actually. Fangraphs, even though you have Kansas City, I think is a half game lead over them. They have Kansas City at a 33% chance, something like that. 42% chance to make the playoffs, whereas they have Minnesota at a 72% chance to make the
And
playoffs.
don't you they are, but there can be bias in there from time to time. If all the variables were the exact same, but it wasn't Kansas City, it was the Yankees, would the numbers still line up? Would they still be exactly the same? Would we give them that percentage with this record at that point in the season, or is this strictly a numbers thing?
I mean, that is a good question to ask, Fish. I mean, I do think Kansas City is one of those teams that kind of has had that stink on them for a while. Ever since they won that World Series, they haven't really had much going on. They have had really not much excitement, not much promise, not much hope. I definitely think that could be something that you could have to take into account for sure. But I just think more so it is interesting to see that while these two teams are, numbers wise, purely in terms of record at the same level, that advanced analytics are showing not just that one team's, oh, maybe they're slightly better, but a sizable gap. So I think that is something to take into account for sure. But like you said, I mean, Cleveland, just the surprise of the season. I mean, Stephen Kwan, you got Josh Naylor. I mean,
Can
how,
he? That's that. Honestly, I don't think there's any way. I think that pressure is just too great, and especially in the last month of the season, if you're hovering around 397 and every single at bat feels like it's the biggest bat in the history of your career, it's a lot to ask. It's a ton to ask. The best hitter in this game for the last 2 years, last 3 years, have been Luis Ariz. But what's happening in Cleveland right now is pretty special. But that's a lot of pressure. I just don't see the 400.
Yeah, and what I will say for Cleveland, looking forward, looking towards October, the one thing that really does concern me about them is their starting pitching. It's been serviceable, it's been good enough. Obviously, you don't get to be 20 games above 500 without good starting pitching. But do they have the guys where, when the pressure's on, like you said, the towels are waving, everyone's screaming, it's a road game, it's an elimination game. Do they have the guys that are going to step up there? I don't see it personally. I could see them maybe if they think this is a serious year for them, if this is a year where they really think, okay, we can take that next step, we can contend, I think you got to add a pitcher at the deadline. I don't think they have
Okay,
that.
so call up, which a lot of people are going to, I'm positive, but you call up Miami and say, what do you need for Jesus Luzardo?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think
Something
that's
like that to me, because I agree. They need another frontline pitcher if you are going to get in a series, a 7-game series with a Baltimore or with a Yankees or something like that, because to me, they are so, I probably shouldn't say this, fan, and Guardians fans are going to be mad at me, and I appreciate that, but the two best teams in the American League are the two best teams by a long, long way right now. And that's Baltimore
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
New York. And by the way, I think Baltimore, was it yesterday that hung 17 on the Yankees? Now, what did that series end up going? Was it 2-1 Yankees or 2-1 Baltimore? Did the Baltimore get two of those? I'm trying to remember, because
I'm
what
not
I was going to say was
sure.
the series before, they just took 2 or 3 from Philly. So these last 2 series that the Orioles have played is Philly and then New York on the road. Philly was at home, but New York on the road. But I think it's they got a 3-3 split is what they got between the two, I believe. If I'm wrong about that, you can let me know that, Marco. But
Yeah.
what's interesting about that is this is how finite baseball is. If I say to you, Marco, the Orioles went 3-3 in 2 series with the Phillies and the Yankees, you'll run with that all day long. But 1 game difference, you go 2-4, and they start asking questions. Well, maybe they're not, of that ilk. You lose 4 of 6 to those powerhouse teams, but that one game and that one different result that makes it 500. I know we play 162, but this is why every one of those is so important, and the great teams don't take games off.
No, exactly. And that's one of the things that I think I love about baseball is just how fine that margin can be. I have it up in front of you right now. 4-2 against the Phillies and the Yankees combined.
So
I
they
mean, those
won
are
both of those series. Good.
2 out of 3 in both those series. I mean, those are 2 of the best teams in the MLB, And so when you're measuring yourself against those top teams, especially for a team like Baltimore, where, bursting onto the scene last year, but then very, very disappointing in the playoffs. I think these are the games that are even more important to them than it would be to a normal team in their spot, just because they do kind of have that aura of being unproven, and they got there last year. They weren't able to take that next step. But let's see. I mean, Gunnar Henderson playing at an MVP
Oh,
level, Adley
he's
Rutschman, and they're just a fun team too. I think I always go back to I'm a Nationals fan, right? So the year we won the World Series, so much of that was on the chemistry. They were having fun. They seemed like they liked each other. They had that energy, that spunk, and I kind of get that from Baltimore. They seem like a group of guys where they love playing together, and they're excited to be there, and they're
right.
wide eyed and they're ready to go, and they have that good energy.
Uh, You're welcome in the Juan Soto trade because you are bearing the fruits of that trade
Yeah,
right now, and I love James Wood. I mean, I think he's going to be a stud uh,
yeah,
in this league. But you got a couple of great players, Mackenzie Gore out of
absolutely.
that thing. That was a huge haul for you. Now, real quick, before we go to the American League, I just want to ask one thing about and look, I like Detroit. They're young guys like Spencer Torkelson and players like they're gonna be fine. They started out good, faded off a little bit. I think they're 6 or 7 under 500 right now. It's just not their time quite yet. But I could see them playing winning baseball this time next year. But I wanted to ask you real quick. What Southside? They were supposed to be. You go back just 2 years ago before the start of the season. You look at the blueprint and you say the Chicago White Sox might be contending for the World Series. And not only have they not, they're as bad as we have in Major League Baseball. They trade off Dylan Cease before the season even starts. And even though he's just been pretty good in San Diego, he was clearly their ace. Now they have some decent pitching on that staff that won't be staying there, by the way. But I have a feeling that the White Sox are going to move at least one arm. And my question to you is: you think Luis Robert is a White Sox this time 2 months from now?
I'd be shocked. I mean, I got to tell you, one of my best buddies at school here is a White Sox fan. So I've heard some long, angry rants about the state of this team. The point I always go back to is my buddy, he has a poster in his room, right? And most posters, they're bragging about pennants, they're bragging about championships. But no, his White Sox poster is bragging about back-to-back playoff appearances. Mind you, playoff appearances where they didn't win a series. One of them, they got swept, right? I mean, this is just an organization where if you take away their World Series in '03, I mean, what have they done ever? It's no commitment to winning. I mean, there's the rumors about relocation. I mean, it's just they're trotting out a AAA team. They're trotting out guys who, frankly, have no business being anywhere near an MLB roster. And like you said, they do have some certain pieces that are going to be moved. I think Garrett Crochet is another guy that is going to really help a contender
He'll be
down the
gone.
road.
He'll be
He'll
gone.
be gone for sure, and he'll be
The other
someone
thing
that I
about
think.
that is with Crochet, who is a fine pitcher, he's not a stud. He's not an ace. He's not a one. And I have a saying all the time on my show that because you are someone's one does not make you a one. You're just
Yeah.
their one because they don't have any other choice. Now, that's not a knock on Crochet. He's a good pitcher. But I have a feeling that depending on how some of these other teams go at the trade deadline, especially if there's a ton of teams still in contention, that you're going to get a lot more for Crochet than he's actually probably worth. And I could see a scenario where Crochet and Robert go together to the same team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like to your point about getting more than you would expect, I think because you have so many teams kind of stuck in that middle, there almost might be a shortage of sellers at the deadline. Obviously we have a little bit of time left to go. These next couple weeks could be
Yeah.
they're everything for a team making a decision on what their future is going to look like. But if you are in a situation where there are too many buyers, not enough sellers, then a guy like Crochet, and especially if you're packaging him with a guy like Roberts, I mean, I could see a team making a very big mistake and giving up a lot of their future for these guys. I mean yeah, I think that's an excellent point.
I mean, I can see that scenario playing out. He's been known to do things like that. Let's go to the AL East. And we were talking just a second ago about the Yankees and the Orioles. And right now, as we speak, that is a half-game lead. But here's the thing. They have left the rest of this division. We'll get to those two at the top in just a second. I think we all kind of saw this being a year in which Tampa took a little bit of a step back, and they've definitely done that. Playing losing baseball right now. Now, having said that, playing in the AL East, if you're not a Dynamo, it's hard not to be playing losing baseball right now. But Tampa has just one of the things that's killing them is their pitching's been awful. I mean, they surrendered 365 runs already this year. And that's one thing they've been able to count on throughout, has been top of the line rotation pitching over and over and over again. And of course, Glasnow's in Los Angeles now instead of Tampa. Blake Snell from a couple of years ago, those two were there together at the same time. And now neither one of them are there. And they just don't have the arms to go up against stacked lineups like Baltimore and New York. So they're down. One of the biggest disappointments has got to be Toronto. And I got to ask you, Marco, they're 4 games under 500 going into tonight's action. Is Toronto going to be sellers at the trade deadline? And if so, who? What does that mean? Are we going to see some big names that are on the move out of Toronto?
I mean, potentially. I got to tell you, if I'm the guy pulling the strings and calling the shots, I'm selling, because when you are in a division like that, being just above mediocrity, that's not going to cut it. You have to be excellent when you're facing these high end teams night in, night out, and they just don't have. They're just not putting it together. At the end of the day, and I think you have to look at guys. You have to look at a guy like Bo Bichette, who's just not simply producing. Where you have these guys who are supposed to be driving everything, and if they're not doing it for you, I don't see a situation where the status quo is going to work. It's just not, and I'm always a big proponent of mediocrity is the worst place to be. If you don't see a reasonable path in the next couple of years where you can add some guys and really get to that top end where you're winning divisions, you're competing for pennants, you're competing for World Series, I wouldn't want my team to be stuck in that middle ground, so that again, if I'm calling the shots, I'm selling.
The organization right now. I think he's already been moved
So.
on. Is Vlad playing his last few games as a Blue Jay? Which, if I'd have told you that 2 years ago, that in 2 years he may not even be on this roster anymore. Is he on the way out the door?
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, to be completely honest with you, I think when you have a guy like that who's so box office, who's such a brand, I think that can kind of lead to some apprehension for teams for moving on, just from the standpoint of we got to fill a stadium, right, at some point. But, I mean, talk about those 3 guys coming up. That was supposed to be like the big 3 going forward. And like you said, Biggio out of the organization, Bichette disappointing, Guerrero not living up to expectations. I mean, I don't know what to tell you, man. It's very, very disappointing because that was such a young and exciting team just a few years ago. And I honestly thought it was going to be them in Baltimore, like leading the way in that division for like the coming years. And they just haven't been able to put it together.
Now, and boy, you talk about now Boston right now, they're looking at this situation saying, okay, we understand that we're not swimming in those waters. We're not catching Baltimore. We're not catching New York. But we're in prime competition for a wild card here. And I think that's what they focus on. And I think they'll get it. I don't think there's any question about that. But when we start looking at foundation, and when you're going up against the Yankees, I mean, good grief, the power in that lineup, especially with Soto now, who's come in, and all the protection that Judge gets, and Stanton starting to, because that's one thing we said, if Stanton can do it, good grief, look out. Volpe at the top of that lineup. I mean, there's everything to like about that. And then you look at Baltimore, and as good as their as the major league roster is, their farm's just as good.
Exactly.
That's even with the graduation of some of their top prospects that are coming in. But they're so stacked for the long haul, which sounds so weird to say out of Baltimore. But if I'm Boston and I look at that, and I'm looking at the Yankees who are stacked right now, let's remember something. They done what they've done on the mound without Garrett Cole up until now. Now, they've just gotten him back. Yet here we are and still holding off what might even be the best team in baseball in Baltimore. And they're still winning that division at that point. So if you're Boston, and by the way, run differential for the Boston Red Sox right now, plus 47. That's probably going to lead most divisions or be right up there at it, and probably good enough to have you in divisional leads. And yet here they sit. What are they? I think it's 10 games. Let me double check that. 10 games as we behind the Yankees. You're never making that up. And then you've got Baltimore, whose farm system plus what they have now is going to keep them stacked forever. What's the game plan going forward for the Red Sox and how to catch up and compete with and catch New York and Baltimore?
Yeah, I think Boston's in a very tricky, but also not the worst situation ever. You have these cornerstones. You have a guy like Rafael Devers. I mean, that's a guy you can build around. That's a guy who can be your foundation. He's been performing this year. You have guys for sure. I think it's got to be more of a slow process for them. They don't have that big prospect waiting in the wings, ready to kind of save the day for them.
Right.
But at the same time, they're still the Red Sox. They're still a big brand. They're still one of the most iconic franchises in all of Major League Baseball, Fish. I mean, they're a team that can attract that big name free agent. They have the financial resources, even if they don't want to spend it. They do have it, So for them, I think it's more of a maintain right now. Maybe even just don't do anything at the deadline right now, kind of take the season for what it is. If you get a wild card berth, great. Obviously you want that. You want to win. But I think for them, it's more of a piece by piece. I think they're a lot closer than it may seem right now.
And
And I
the
know that.
question you have to ask yourself is this version of the Boston Red Sox on par with last year's version of the Rangers? Could we see a run like that? And when you are clearly the third best team in your division, I don't know that I can say that. Now on paper they may be every bit as good as last year's Rangers,
Yeah.
but
I
it
mean,
may
also,
not matter.
you got to look at it too, though. A guy like Tanner Hawk, I mean, Cy Young candidate right now. There, those are the type of dudes you look for a team to make a run in October. You have to have these guys who have that potential to kick it into the next gear. For me, it's always the example I look back to, and I'm not trying to draw a comparison to this because I think it's an untouchable performance. But Madison Bumgarner in 2014, that's a guy who can
3
be
wins
that
in that
pitcher.
World Series, crazy, wildest thing I've ever seen in baseball.
I mean, one of the things that made me fall in love with the sport was watching that series and watching that entire run. But so having a guy who has the potential to, when he comes in, you're good. That's how I felt when we had Steven Strasburg in 2019. When he came in, I was like, okay, you know what? We can relax. Things are going to be fine. So that having a piece like that does give me a little bit of optimism. But in terms of the comparisons to the Rangers, I really just don't know if I see the juice in the lineup. Really, I don't really feel like I there's many guys, so I'm looking up and down that lineup. I'm like, do I feel comfortable counting on you when the chips are down and we need a hit and we're down 3 in the bottom of the 7th, an instant elimination game, and we got to get it going right now? I don't know if I see those guys up and down their lineup.
Made a couple of years ago, they made. I think a decision is the right way to put it. They decided they were going to build around Devers, and I thought, not Xander Bogaerts, really? And so they didn't give him the near $300 million that he was looking for. And he ended up getting traded and going across the country. And I was like, and let's remember, he hasn't done anything on the West Coast, but he punished folks on the East Coast when he was in Boston. And I really thought, I was like, this guy.
Absolutely.
I mean, why would you, and Boston fans lost their minds when that happened. How are you going to let him go out the door for this? Well, he hadn't done anything on the West Coast. And Devers continues to do what he does. That was a smart decision. If you're looking for one potential building block to build around, they made the right call, and I did not think that was the case at the time.
Absolutely, and I was in the same camp as you. I mean, it felt like I was watching Mookie Betts all over again. Obviously maybe Bogart's not exactly at the tier of Mookie Betts where he's one of the best players in the league, but still, it felt like, history's repeating itself again. You can't let a guy like that walk out the door. Like, give him his money, pay him, keep him. This is how you win games in this league, is having guys like that. But I mean, credit to them. They clearly evaluated talent in the right way. And Rafael Devers has been a guy who I love watching him. Just an outstanding player to watch. The ball jumps off his bat in that he's outstanding. And I think he is a guy where if they can get a couple more pieces around him, maybe another arm or two, and I'm not talking about this year, more so down the line. But I definitely think they're not as far off as you might expect, given what they're going up against.
Marco, let's do it, buddy. Let's start with the National League East. Let's start at the top. A team that to me, it's a clearly defined top 3. I know people are going to talk about the Dodgers, but I think they have pitching issues. And they're going to miss Mookie Betts for the next 6 weeks, but I don't worry about that because nobody in the West is catching them. So they're going to win that division. But to me, the clearly defined, though I don't know which order is Baltimore, New York, and Philly. I think those are, and with all apologies to our friends in Cleveland, I like them quite a bit. They're not better than those 3 teams. But let's start at the top of the NL East, Philly, and it's one thing for that powerhouse lineup, whether it be Evan Baum one night, whether it be Bryce Harper, it really just it doesn't matter because the whole lineup can hit. But when I look at this, and if you roll out and Aaron Nola is your 3, and I don't even really want to rank them 1 through 3 because Ranger Suarez has had just an amazing year. But then maybe Zach Wheeler's my 3. If we're having that conversation, you can't decide one of those 3 to be your 3. Let me tell you something. Every one of those guys is a 1, is an ace on any team in baseball. They have 3 of them to go with that lineup. I don't know if we're looking at the pin could cost them down the stretch or whatever the case may be. But what I do know that on paper between that top 3, and here's the reality in a 7-game series, as long as it's spaced out, you don't have to go past those 3.
No, absolutely.
You're going to get one of those every night just about. Are they the best team in the National League? I think so.
I think right now, yeah, if the playoffs start today and it's a 1v1, Dodgers Phillies, I'm taking the Phillies every time. Now, with that being said, we still do have a couple months to go, and we have seen teams that have come in riding high into the All Star break and haven't been able to maintain. Now, I'm not saying that happens to the Phillies, but what I am saying is I don't think they have a defined lead over the Dodgers in the sense of who's the best team in the National League. I still have faith in the Dodgers. I still think the Dodgers top to bottom, like it's just name after name after name. It's outstanding. But the Phillies, they scare me a lot. As a Nationals fan, as someone who doesn't particularly like the Phillies too much, they scare me. They look very real this year, and more so than past years too. I think 2022, obviously, they make the World Series, they go on this run. But for me, at least, I still wasn't entirely buying it in the sense of them being a perennial powerhouse, top of the league, pencil them in every year, NLCS. I'm
Yeah.
definitely starting to get that
Better
feeling a
believe it
lot more.
now, because
Oh yeah,
they're
no,
definitely there. And we'll get to those Dodgers in just one second. But let's stay in that National League East. And remember, there's another team playing winning baseball who was struggling a couple of weeks ago, but seem to be finding their stride right now. Atlanta's won 3 or 4 in a row, I think it is. 3 in a row, yeah. And Schellenbach had a great performance the other night. Boy, he was just he was sweeping that slider, and they couldn't do anything with it the other night. But Atlanta, I mean, I know they lost Acuna, but if Max Fried can do his thing, and Schellenbach and that life, it's not like, even though they lost Ronald Acuna, it's not like the lineup is bereft of talent. They're still there. Atlanta had their little bump in the road. I think their best baseball is probably ahead of them, even with Acuna being out for the year. They're not going to catch Philly, but I mean, I think they're, and we can talk about the past, and what happens every time. And I hear you, and I get all that. But baseball is a year to year thing. Yeah, it just is. I mean, if it's not, the Rangers would be, sitting atop that American League East right now instead of stinking it up. But that's how baseball goes.
exactly.
Atlanta, serious World Series contender, or about what we're used to?
I think serious World Series contender. Honestly, I don't think there's any other team in the MLB where they can lose a guy, their superstar, their clear cut best player, MVP candidate, and me still have faith in them. But I mean, I know you just said it's a year for year thing, but we saw these guys lose him and win the World Series. You have Marcell Ozuna going nuclear this season. You have a guy like Matt Olson. You have guys there, Austin Riley, Ozzy Albies. I
Ozzy
mean,
Albies, yeah.
they have these guys who have that pedigree, who are used to winning, who know what it feels like, who know the steps that you need to take, who know what the process needs to look like. That still gives me optimism. Now, the NL, it's a tough mountain to climb. With a team like the Phillies, a team like the Dodgers, even a team like the Brewers. There are definitely teams there that I don't necessarily know if, oh yeah, I'm gonna 100% pick them over them when it comes to a series in October. But with that being said, I have faith in these guys that if they catch fire late in September, Fish, I don't have any reservations about believing that they go all the way. I'm high on Atlanta, and maybe it's because I do tend to watch a lot of NL East baseball, so I feel like I have more so of a feel for these guys. But I think they're a very hit or miss team. I'll say that they're a team where I could see them bottoming out and making the playoffs by the skin of their teeth and doing nothing. I could also see them going on a run this year. I think they really have like the widest range out of any of the playoff contending teams that we've seen so far.
The National League version of the Boston Red Sox. Yeah. Only difference is they only got one team above them, but the run differential's one run apart from Boston, and they have enough question marks where you're pretty positive they're not winning at all, but they're going to be there all the way through and give somebody a hard way to go in a series. Let's talk about a team who's really gotten hot. I got one word for you: grimace, my friend, has been the word around the Mets clubhouse. They've gone nuclear here lately. Winners of 8 of their last 2. I think they won 7 in a row, and then 8 of their last 10. They were on the mat. They looked like they were finished. Just sweep them up. Another disappointing season for that payroll, but they've caught fire lately, and they're right back in the thick of things. Now, they're only 2 games under 500, but they are definitely back in the thick of things, the wild card.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the NL wild card completely open. I know we've been talking about it a lot, but yeah, the Mets are a team where I was ready to count them down and out, in terms of May. But you've seen a guy like Lindor really step it up, as they're moving. Marte, not so good on the defensive end, but with the bat in his hands, he's definitely been producing for them, getting things done. Luis Severino really carrying the load. What worries me for them is just the bullpen. I mean, I don't trust Edwin Diaz anymore. There's not really a guy there where it's late in the game, you need outs, it's a high pressure situation. who are they turning to that you trust, Fish? I don't see a guy there, and that's one of those things where that's the block that I just can't get past.
Closer, I'll give them Suarez if they'll trade Pete Alonso.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Come
that's a
on,
good
man.
one.
And of course, the other two teams in the division. You mentioned Washington. I'll still hold to it. That Soto trade's the best thing that ever happened to them. Lately. Anyway, I think it helped retool some things. They're not there yet. I think we all know that. But there's a blueprint there. There's a game plan to getting back in contention. In Washington, you can comment on that. And then over in Miami, you generally don't trade a player like Luis Ariz when they did. You trade him, but you don't trade him 2 months before the trade deadline. And they did that, and they got a decent package for him. But the number one player they got out of that was Dylan Head, the big prospect, who is now out for the year. So we'll see. But he's still a prospect in a ways from making a huge impact. But I don't foresee that being the end of and I won't call it a fire sale in Miami. I don't know that it's quite that. But a guy like Luzardo, I just cannot envision a scenario in which he ends the season with the Marlins.
Yeah, even a guy like Jazz Chisholm. I mean, I don't really see the benefit to them for holding on to these guys if you're not competing. I mean, if you're going to have this mindset of retooling, and then same with the Nationals too. A guy like Jesse Winker, a guy like Kyle Finnegan. I think these are two teams kind of at the bottom of the division that have some of these pieces that are maybe more defined as sellers than this other. They're kind of, I guess, record-wise, the Nationals maybe are with the group of teams competing for that wild card spot, but more mentality-wise in terms of the organization. These are some of the teams I think that have these little pieces that are going to really maybe make the difference for one of these higher up teams in what comes October time.
National League Central, maybe the most confusing division every single year in Major League Baseball, because generally what we have is now it had been the have-nots of the Reds and the Pirates. Obviously, I guess both of those teams have great young players. To me, especially Pittsburgh. Well, there's more of them, I think, is the difference. And they have Paul Skeens. So there's something to build around there. But generally, this division, you have a team that'll get hot and then they'll just plummet and somebody will catch them and get right up there. Then they'll plummet. And it's like nobody wants it. But this year, and I'll be honest with you. Now, you tell me, because I've watched this team pretty closely this year. Is a heck of a player. Yelich has gotten hot again. I mean, we haven't heard anything out of Christian Yelich in a couple of years, but he's playing very well right now. But to me, the difference, and it's not a shot at Craig Counsell because Craig Counsell's a fine manager, but what's going on in Milwaukee to me, I mean, you just sent Corbin Burns packing. The three best pitchers in your organizations over the last 3 years are no longer in that organization. You traded them off. And to send Burns over to Baltimore and then still be doing what they're doing and dominating the Central, I guess because I think this is about Pat Murphy. I think he's done an amazing job. But I guess my question to you, Marco, is this about Milwaukee? Or is it about the rest of this division? Just like I look at Chicago, my good buddy Chuck's team. Imanaga got shelled today. He'd given up 3 runs before he got an out in that game. It's the inconsistencies to me of the rest of the division. Like I like Milwaukee. I don't think they're a realistic threat for a World Series. But I think the reality of this situation is they're just far more consistent than those other 4 teams.
Absolutely. I mean, to me, the NL Central is the division of but. With every team, it's they have this, but there's kind of this major gaping issue that kind of keeps me from really believing that they can make any serious noise. Milwaukee has been extremely impressive. And like you said, it's really all about consistency. I think every team in that division has shown flashes at some point throughout this first half of the season, flashes of greatness. I mean, Elly De La Cruz in Cincinnati is one of the most electric players. And like we were saying, I mean, Chicago, they had a Cy Young candidate for a little bit. They just can't figure out how to hit the ball. And I mean, Paul Skeens, is it crazy to say that Paul Skeens is playing like a top 5 pitcher right now? I mean, it feels crazy to say that, but if you're watching it since he came up, I mean, it's hard to argue. But Milwaukee, I mean, you got a guy like Freddie Peralta just striking out everything that moves. I mean, Yelich is back, obviously, showing us a little bit more of what we'd hope to expect. Willie Adames, I mean, Contreras, they have guys, but at the same time, I do agree with you. I do agree with your point. They're a step below the class of the NL. I would almost even say I would like Atlanta more than them personally. I think if you put Atlanta in that division, I think Atlanta
it'd be a fun series to watch. Yeah, I
Absolutely.
think that would be probably one of the more entertaining series in a wild card round or something like that. And in St. Louis, which we have a lot of St. Louis fans here in the area, they
Mhm.
have never warmed up to Marmol at all. I'll tell you this: I told them going into the season, I said, "Look, the last couple of years, you can place that on him in his lap if you'd like to, but take a look at this rotation." Aging, they haven't had some, they haven't had their high profile pitching prospects come up and do what they were hoping. I will tell you this: some of their young everyday lineup players are really coming into their own, and they're playing
Mhm.
much better baseball than they had been. They climbed up to second from the division, from the bottom. Now, having said that, there's like a game separating second and last in this division. So for whatever that's worth. But one of the great moves that they made in the offseason was to bring in Sonny Gray, a guy who finished second
Absolutely.
in the AL Cy Young last year. And this is
Mhm.
amazing because as a Vanderbilt fan, I've loved Sonny Gray since he was a quarterback at Smyrna High School, and been following his career. But he seems to get better the older he gets.
Yeah, Sonny Gray's a guy I can remember. I was taking a trip out to California over a decade ago. I saw him pitch when he was pitching for Oakland, and he had his moments back then too. But a guy that is just aged like fine wine, and has really been that consistent rock every fifth day that they've needed. Because to be completely honest, outside of Sonny Gray, I'm not really seeing much consistency in that rotation. St. Louis is another interesting team too because they have these aging stars, Goldschmidt, Arenado. Does that kind of factor into their decision more? Where okay, we're at the same spot as some of these other teams, right there contending for that wild card spot. But because we have these aging guys, does that give them more of an inclination to push it more all in and,
Boy,
get someone
but
at the
the problem
deadline?
is you have to go to your fan base and say, "Hey, we were right there in the thick of the wild cards, and we just traded Paul Goldschmidt for some
No, yeah.
prospects." I mean, that is going to freak a great fan base out. They understand the game and they understand what that's like, and they are in contention still, even though they're not
Yeah.
a great baseball team. They're still there. You trade a piece like that for prospects, they
Oh,
better.
but I'm saying the other way. I'm saying they might buy it because they have these aging guys and they are in
You're going to
contention.
buying what are they selling? Because if they're buying, what are they giving up? I mean, I don't think they have much to give up in that regards,
That's a
unless
very good
they're
point.
going to give because their pieces are their parent club pieces, not their prospects.
Yeah.
I don't. They could buy, but I don't know what they would buy with.
I mean,
You
it's a tough spot to be in, 500. I mean, it's purgatory essentially. But the thing about an organization like St. Louis, I mean, one of the top class organizations in all of Major League Baseball, they're one of those organizations where I have some more faith. I have faith that maybe they'll be complacent at the deadline. Maybe they won't do anything, but they seem to be an organization that always has a plan. And at the end of the day, that's really all you can hope for as a baseball fan. You're not going to contend every year. You're not going to be on the precipice of a World Series every year, but just to feel like you're in good hands.
National League West with Chicago. I think the beginning of the season injury to Justin Steele. Now he's back now, but we're
Mm-hmm.
not seeing the Justin Steele that we saw last year. I mean, because if I could see the Justin Steele they had last year with Imanaga, though they're starting to figure him out a little bit. He came in
Yeah.
and they couldn't touch him, so they're starting to figure him out. But if he can get back to early season prowess and you get the Justin Steele from last year, that's a 1-2 that I can trust with anybody, and that gives them probably the best chance to catch Milwaukee should they flounder a little bit. And the everyday lineup is solid, but it's not producing the type of baseball that it probably should.
Yeah, I mean, they're a team that I really just can't figure out. I mean, the entire year. I mean, who do we trust to hit? I mean, they have Bellinger, I guess, but it's like there's really not that. They don't have that like that great bat, that you need to be one of those teams. The pitching, Jameson Talon is a guy that's really impressed me this entire year. A guy that I've always, felt like I could root for, and a guy that,
Back in
given his
Pittsburgh, yeah.
given his backstory, a guy that I'm really happy to see doing well. But just a team that what's their identity? And I guess you could really say that for a lot of the teams in this division. But what are you trying to do? I mean, are they trying to win? Like, I guess based on the moves they made in the offseason, you would lean towards that direction. But I just don't see it with them. I mean, they don't play a fun style of baseball. When I'm watching their games, the games I have watched, it doesn't really feel like even when they're winning, it's just something's missing. That little like spark, that little like that
Yeah.
fire almost.
And I think if you look at the rest of the Central between St. Louis, Cincinnati, and Pittsburgh, uh, And I like all those teams. I do. They have different things and different strengths about each and every one of them. For me, beyond Paul Skeens, it's the young lineup, the athletic, the versatile lineups of Pittsburgh and Cincinnati both. And then some of the young pieces and some of the big bats in St. Louis. But honestly, if you took the entire Central and put it all together, I don't think, and you put the best players on each team and made one team, I still don't think they'd be better than Philly or Baltimore or New York. So it's a divisional thing for me. But right now, Milwaukee, and to my everlasting shame, Marco, I picked Milwaukee to finish last in this division. But it was after they traded Burns.
I can't blame you.
I mean, it's not like, and then the best pieces they've had have gone out the window. So, I thought I was on solid ground there, but Pat Murphy said, yeah, watch this.
No, I mean, I can't blame you. I mean, living in Wisconsin, a lot of Brewers fans around here, no one was high on them coming into the year. Everyone was just, the general consensus was we just want to do better than the Cubs, just because they have that whole anger built up,
Sure.
but they weren't expecting this either. I mean, how could you when you trade a guy like Corbin Burns? I mean, talk about an elite level pitcher. Like you don't see it,
In the game.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, we're competing and you just traded our best closer. And they like that, and they continue to trade these pieces, but they're continuing to win. So, I missed, but I'll take it and I'll pick them because if the situation is the same this time next year, I'll pick it again. I'll pick it like that again. Let's move on to our final division, the National League West. Surprise, surprise, going to be won by the Dodgers again this year. They come into today's action with a 9-game lead. San Diego and Arizona are tied 9 games behind them. San Francisco 10.5, and Colorado's 20 games out and more, pretty much an afterthought, to be honest with you at this point. Before we get to the Dodgers, let's work our way up. San Francisco missed on, now they got a few pieces in the offseason that they liked, but they missed on some heavy hitters, including Aaron Judge. And they really were thinking they were going to land a name or two, and they did, but not the names that they were looking for to catch the Dodgers and things like that. They bring over Bob Melvin. I did not like that move for the Giants at all. I thought Bob Melvin did a fine job. I think it was a 3-time manager of the year in Oakland.
Way back then.
But I think you get that award because you get more with less. It's not about winning pennants or anything in that aspect. I don't like the fit there, but they've shown flashes. But they just simply don't have enough here in the tank. I look at Arizona, and, this is a team that they went out and got Jordan Montgomery before the season started, but they've had injuries at the top two. Those top of that rotation that has certainly hurt them. I've been a huge Zach Gallen fan for a long time. That guy's got more moving on his stuff than just about anybody there. But the pieces have just not come together. But, they're only a game under 500 right now, and certainly right there in the thick of the wild card. We moved to San Diego, and as a lifelong Padre fan, and full disclosure, I watch every game, and as soon as we get done with this game, I'm going home and watching the Padres and Brewers play tonight. But of flack from Padres. Mm-hmm. And I try to say to them, you act as if we were a power before he got there, and he's just screwed everything up. We were nothing. Absolutely nothing. Yeah. There was no reason to go to the ballpark. Now, just a couple of years ago, you knocked the Dodgers out after winning 100 games plus they did, and then you knocked them out and make it and host the NLCS. That's because of AJ Preller. And he makes crazy, wild moves sometimes, and sometimes they pay off, and sometimes they don't. But considering the market, they went into that season last year with the 3rd highest payroll in baseball in San Diego. That should tell you all you need to know. But this is an underachieving organization right now, because even though I think they're a game under 500, game under 500, 39-40. Man, are you kidding? Now, I think a lot of it has to do with injuries to Joe Musgrove and to Yu Darvish. Both very capable players. Yu's getting older, but still, he's been fantastic. I think one of the things hurts him. Dylan Cease has been average, and they need him to be much better than that. I think the biggest surprise for them has been Matt Waldron and that knuckle, that 82-mile-an-hour knuckle that simply does not move but drops off the table with no rotation, makes it very hard to hit. To me, their issue is the inconsistencies with players like, and of course they lost Xander Bogaerts up until August somewhere. but it's been a complete lack of effort in my mind for Manny Machado.
Yeah.
Xander Bogaerts, before he went down, wasn't hitting. And now Bebo, Fernando Tatis, is finally getting it done. You go out and you trade for Luis Ariz. The way I look at it is Preller's done all you can do.
Yeah, I mean,
I
at the
don't know
end of
what
the
else
day,
you can do.
he can't play the games, right? At the end of the day, there's only so much, like you're saying. You're getting guys, not just this year, but throughout the course of the last, decade or so, or half decade, you're getting guys who are winners, who are top level players. And at the end of the day, at a certain point, the players have to play the game, right? The players have to win. And a guy like Manny Machado, I mean, you can't
Blowing
expect to
bubbles,
win. He's
jogging to
not
first
good.
base,
Yeah,
I
he
mean,
doesn't care. I mean,
making
and
30
it's
million a
just
year. Yeah.
yeah, it's disappointing. I mean, you do have a guy like Jerkson Profar, who I mean, he's been
Where'd that come
outstanding.
from?
Exactly, but that just shows you. I mean, could you imagine if you were getting this level of production out of a guy like Profar and your stars were actually playing like stars? Because that's what it
Think
takes.
about this. You've got Profar who comes into tonight's act hitting 323.
Mhm.
Jurickson Profar. Now remember, he was number one prospect in baseball several years ago, but he never lived up to that. He's finally
Yeah,
healthy now. But to me, and it's crazy because you gave 300 plus to Fernando, who is now starting to play better. 300 to Manny, 290, I think it was, 285, something like that, to Xander Bogaerts. And the best hitters in your lineup are a rookie in Jackson Merrill, who's going to be a superstar, and
yeah,
Jurickson Profar, who you gave $1 million to play this year because nobody wanted him. He sat on the open market forever, and finally he just came back to San Diego for a paltry $1 million, and he's hitting 323 and going to make the All-Star game. But this team can't put it all together consistently, and the weird part about it is they have a winning record up until that losing streak on the road where they lost 7 in a row, where they were a better road team than they were at home. They were like 6 games under 500 at home, and yet
yeah.
only a game under 500. That generally doesn't pan out.
I mean, they're such a confusing team. It's like, and it hasn't just been this year either. I think year after year, they're just one of those teams where you're just waiting for them to put it together. Like at a certain point, it becomes almost like more likely that they don't win something when they have all this talent and they have a guy like Preller who's making moves. He's not, being complacent, which is something you have to respect about him. But I mean, I can't imagine your frustration as a Padres fan because I mean, Manny Machado frustrates me as a neutral who doesn't really care one way or the other how the Padres do. But it's just like you have this potential right here. When you have a guy like Profar, like it's a waste in my opinion. When you have a guy like having that outstanding season and really taking that leap and like being that guy that can be that breakout star for you, and the guys who are supposed to do it, who you thought you could count on, aren't doing it, and
Here's the
really
reality: if those stars perform, they're Baltimore.
yeah,
I mean, they
exactly.
are. They have that type of firepower. But when you play, when you lack passion, it will bite you in the butt in this game. Let's go with one more team, the Los Angeles Dodgers, a team who has won World Series to their credit since 1988, and that was a COVID shortened season of 60 games. I barely even counted as a World Series, to be honest
Yeah,
with you.
I don't know about
But
that one.
this year's version, I'll be honest with you. Now, I know that when I got Shohei and that top 3, it scares. I mean, I don't know that I've ever seen a lineup in which Freddie Freeman might be the third best player in a lineup, but when you start off with Mookie Betts, then you go to Shohei Ohtani and Freddie Freeman, and you got Smith batting fourth usually. I love their young center fielder Outman. There's a lot of pieces to like quite a bit about this Dodgers team, but I'm gonna be honest with you, they rarely come through in the clutch in the playoffs. And I don't trust this pitching staff right now. I'm going to be honest with you. And because Walker Buehler, I know he's been out and been injured, but and maybe he captures it and it gets back, but something's missing there in my mind. And I like Glasnow. He's a big dude, and he can be a killer. There's no doubt. Mookie's out, another 6 weeks, I think so. They'll have him for their stretch run, and hopefully he's everything he was before he got hurt. But I don't know, man. This Dodger team, as good as they are, because we've seen this team do this over and over, completely dominate the West. But when the playoffs come, it's always something, and they never get it done. And I've seen better Dodger teams than this not go near that far. So maybe they win it all. Maybe this year they figure it all out. And I know they can outslug just about anybody. But to me, they've run into a series with Baltimore, Philly, or the Yankees, and I wouldn't take them over any of those teams.
Yeah, I mean, it's year after year with the Dodgers, right? Where it almost feels like because they're so good within their division and it's so uncompetitive every year in the West, at least in most years, it almost feels like come playoff time, they're not ready for games to mean something. They're not ready for those high pressure situations. But I mean, they're a hard team to discount when you look up and down. I mean, like even a guy like Teoscar Hernandez has been outstanding. But to your point, I don't get that spunk that I used to get from them, that like fire. I mean, back in the days with like Kershaw and Greinke, those are the Dodger teams I think of where I'm like, yeah, those are world beaters. No one's doing anything to them. Now, obviously, they never put it together, but it does feel a little bit different this year. I like Yamamoto. I do think he's been a very productive ad for them.
Better be
Glasnow,
for
like you
what they
mentioned,
spent
obviously.
for him. For what they spent for him, he better be. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, and the Dodgers, another team also that we know they're not afraid to go out and get somebody if they feel like they're missing someone. They'll sell the farm, they'll sign any contract they need to sign, pay any luxury tax, whatever. Like they're a team, but I don't know if it's their year. I think them in Philadelphia. I think as we go down the stretch, both those teams are going to go through their ups and downs, their lulls. Obviously the Dodgers will eventually get Mookie Betts back. I think that's going to be really interesting at the top of the NL. My gut right now says Philadelphia is probably the better team right now, which it pains me to say that, but I don't know. I think it's a pick 'em honestly between those two guys. And then after that, I mean, whoever's going to come out of the AL, it's going to be a dogfight. There's so many. I think the Dodgers are on par with Baltimore, Yankees, Phillies, Dodgers. I think those are the four teams that I look at and I say, okay, these are the elite of the elite. It's going to be some combination of these four in the World Series, at least in my eyes. Now with baseball, you never know. Someone could get hot. I mean, Arizona in the World Series last year. Who was predicting that? But I don't know. I'm not ready to count LA out just yet.
England right now are like, oh, so it's like that. I mean, it's just, hey, maybe would it do okay if we play too? Yeah, I mean, we're not counting you guys, but I think there's a clear line drawn about the elites, and they're on the back end of that. But it's a great place to be, and a far better season than they expected. And I tell you what, let's do this at the end of the regular season again and see how it panned out, especially after the trade deadline and that grueling second half of the season, Marco. I say we do this again and a whole bunch more of these. Full disclosure, guys, Marco and I are meeting for the first time right now, and I certainly enjoyed doing this podcast with you, man. I think we need to do a whole lot more of these, my man.
Yeah, I'd love that, Fish. I'd love that a lot. And if we are going to do this again at the end of the regular season for baseball, I want to put this, out to the world, out to the universe. I think Seattle is going to be the team that's going to surprise people in the second half of this season. They've been doing good, but I think once Rodriguez gets that back going, look out for Seattle to maybe be that like kind of Arizona, play that role from last year. I think that's the team that I'm high on.
From the NL or the AL West for a second straight year, and neither time it was the Houston Astros.
That'd be something.
I'll give up watching baseball. Like I thought I knew baseball, but I don't. And Marco Squitieri from the University of Wisconsin, man. How about it? Go Badgers, man.
Yes, sir.
By the way, my boys drafted Tanner Bortolini. I'm looking forward to watching this young man. I think he's going to be the heir apparent to Ryan Kelly. I love that kid. He broke was it the cone drill? I think it was the record at the draft for offensive lineman. He's going to be a stud. But man, hold it down for us there up in Wisconsin, man, and we'll do this again soon, my brother.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. Talk to you soon.
And the Fish on the Walker Talks platform, and you can check us out next week.